All right, good afternoon. I'm hearing voices in the back. Oh, no, as long as it's not in my head. Trip announcement, not surprising. The Secretary General will arrive in Davos on Thursday morning to attend this year's World Economic Forum. The Secretary General will deliver a special address on the state of the world on Thursday afternoon. While in Davos, he will take part in an event which he will ask young global shapers for their solutions to global challenges. This event, which will be live streamed, kicks off the UN's 75th anniversary initiative, which will see people from all walks of life join the biggest ever global conversation on how to build a better future for all. The Secretary General will also attend the launch of a scheme by the Global Compact, which encourages business worldwide to adopt sustainable and socially responsible policies to bolster ambition to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. He will also hold a number of bilateral meetings with world leaders on the margins of the World Economic Forum. And we expect the Secretary General back in New York on Friday night. This afternoon at 1:15, the Secretary General will speak at an opening of an exhibit commemorating the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. He's expected to reflect on his own visit to Yad Vashem 2 years ago, where he said he was shocked once again by the ability of anti-Semitism to reinvent itself and re-emerge time and again over millennia. The Secretary General will pay tribute to Zoltan Matyash, a Holocaust survivor who will attend the opening of the exhibit. And as survivors grow older, the Secretary General will stress it is essential that we keep their memories alive and carry their testimony forward in new ways for new generations. And you're, of course, all invited to attend that opening. This afternoon, the Deputy Secretary General will be traveling to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to deliver a keynote speech on Africa Rising, the role of business and entrepreneurship in overcoming the complexities of a continent. And that her remarks will be delivered at the Harvard Business School. Back here, Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, briefed the Security Council this morning on the situation in the Middle East. She told Council members that the Secretary General has been clear in calling on all leaders to exercise maximum restraint and has emphasized that the world cannot afford another conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, she said, is not immune to tensions in the region. At the same time, the effects of its persistence are felt far beyond Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. Ms. DiCarlo said the UN has continued its engagement with all Palestinian factions on the holding of long overdue presidential and legislative elections and expressed the Secretary General's hope that the Palestinian elections will be scheduled. She reiterated that all settlements are illegal under international law, noting that the annexation of some or all areas of Area C would deal a devastating blow to the potential of reviving negotiations and advancing peace. Ms. DiCarlo emphasized the continued urgency of resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of United Nations resolutions. She stressed the crucial necessity of dialogue and diplomacy in the region. Also briefing was Ursula Mueller, the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, and she briefed the Council on her recent 6-day trip to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, and we briefed you extensively on that trip yesterday. The UN and its humanitarian agencies are supporting the government-led response efforts to the heavy rain, snowfall, and avalanches in Pakistan. The UN and its partners are providing food items, winterized tents, and warm clothing, blankets, and non-food items, in addition to heavy machinery to clear snow, dewatering pumps, and power generators. Authorities also have sought support from the humanitarian agencies for rescue and relief operations. As of yesterday, 105 people have been reportedly killed as a result of the weather conditions in northern and southwestern Pakistan, and nearly 1,300 houses were reportedly damaged. Rescue efforts are ongoing, and major highways and roads are being cleared in the affected provinces. However, access to remote areas and villages is extremely limited. Similarly, heavy snowfall, flooding, and avalanches impacted 11 of 34 provinces in Afghanistan. The UN and our humanitarian agencies are supporting the government-led response and assessment in the impacted areas. Many areas are still inaccessible in Afghanistan, so the scale of the impact is not fully clear yet inaccessible areas, emergency shelter, warm clothing, food, and non-food items, as well as hygiene kits, are urgently needed. Today, the World Food Programme unveiled the Hunger Map Live, a new tool that monitors food security in more than 90 countries and that also issues predictions for areas where data is limited. The Hunger Map presents data collected on a continuous basis, along with metrics on conflict, climate shocks, population, and weather. WFP's goal is to present food security assessments that are cheaper, faster, and more importantly, that helps its staff, partners, and global policymakers deliver better services to the people who need them. This is also another tool to achieve SDG 2, zero hunger by 2030. You can take a look at this very neat map on the web. And in Geneva tomorrow, the World Health Organization's Director General, Dr. Tedros, will convene an emergency committee meeting on the coronavirus. The committee will ascertain whether the outbreak constitutes a public health emergency of international concern and what recommendations should be taken to manage this. And in a short while, I will be joined by Elliot Harris, who, as you know, is the chief economist of the United Nations and an assistant secretary general for economic development, and Marta Roig, the chief of emerging trends and issues in DESA's development section. They will brief you on the launch of the World Social Report 2020, Inequality in a Rapidly Changing World. Before we get to them, I will try to answer some questions. Errol.
All right. Regarding this Libya agreement in Berlin, obviously it's a huge success for the German diplomacy. It's, if you allow me, remind me a bit of the preparing of the Dayton Peace Accords, where the UN was passive, had a passive role, but still was participating. What was the exact role of the UN at the Berlin process, and who is going to monitor the ceasefire from the point of view of UN?
Well, the meeting was organized, and I would say very well organized and hosted by the Germans under the leadership of Chancellor Angela Merkel. They worked very closely with all those parties that were invited, a number of national governments, as well as with the United Nations through the head of the UN mission on the ground, Mr. Salame, who worked very closely with German authorities. And this was, I think, what was very much appreciated is that this international conference was fed into the Libyan-owned and the Libyan-led process, which is being facilitated by the United Nations. And as we talked about, we hope there would be another number of other meetings on the different tracks that Mr. Salame has outlined. We were obviously encouraged by the calls of the participants in the Berlin conference for a full-fledged ceasefire. We are working actively to try to support such calls, and we urge all member states to put pressure on both sides to make sure that the guns fall silent. Right now, as we understand it from our colleagues on the ground, Mr. Salame is back in the mission area. He's back in Tripoli. There is a fragile truce is holding in Tripoli. We have some capacity to report back, as we've always had, on violations. But what the future will look like, obviously, there will be discussion in the Security Council this afternoon. As we mentioned, the Secretary General will be briefing in close consultations, and we will see what decisions and endorsements the Security Council takes.
So just UN does play an active role, as you said, and participating in monitoring of the ceasefire. Is that fair to say?
There is the UN has some capacity to report back on ceasefire violations. There is, and this is part of its mandate, and it's outlined in the Secretary General's latest report. There is no massive UN capacity at this, to do full-scale monitoring. And again, what our capacity are outlined in our mandate and in the report. Mr. Salameh, meanwhile, is trying to convene the Libyan Joint Military Committee in the coming days to try to initiate discussions that we hope would lead to a permanent ceasefire. And we're also working on the political dialogue forum as well. Edie.
Steph, what is Gar Peterson doing in terms of trying to de-escalate the situation in Idlib?
Mr. Peterson is continuing to consult with all the parties. He will be in Moscow later this week to meet with the foreign minister and the minister of defense, and he intends to travel to Damascus next week. And then he expects to report back to the Security Council on the 29th of this month of January. Carla.
There was a very, very challenging ARIA council meeting yesterday in, I guess, was the ECOSOC chamber, or questioning the credibility of a recent report by the OPCW. Do you have any word, or can you say anything about where this is likely to lead, the questioning of the credibility of the organization?
I think that's a question best left to journalists like yourselves and analysts to see, to predict. I can only speak for the facts as we have them, and that's it. Okay, I will get our guests. Please stay on for Elliot Harris. I'll be right back.